Hey everybody, Chad Wesley Smith here for Juggernaut Training Systems, joined by Marisa, Inda, and today we're going to be talking to you about how to train the squat. So we're going to go over some key technical points, some common mistakes that we see lifters making, and then some ideas and notes about training frequency and different exercises you can use to bring up weak points in your squat. The first technical point that we want to address is having great upper back tightness in your setup. Your upper back is going to create the shelf for you to place the bar upon, and it's going to stop you from rounding over during the squat. So we're looking at upper back tightness in 3 steps. First, we want to move your hands in. That's moving them in maybe slightly from where you have them now, because of course everybody's anatomy is different, their shoulder mobility is different. So Marisa is able to get her hands super close, where for me, close hands is like just inside the collars, but as you can see, slightly different sized people. So first we're moving your hands in a little bit closer. Once you've done that, we're squeezing your upper back together, trying to pinch your shoulder blades like you're trying to hold a pencil between your scapula. And once you've done that, then you're trying to squeeze your elbows together, trying to touch them together behind your back. Very unlikely your elbows actually touch, probably impossible, but that's the intent, and that's gonna really create this strong flexed upper back position so you can start off with a stable squat. The next key point we want to address is your breathing and bracing. So a very common cue that a lot of people use for breathing and bracing in the squat is to have big air into your belly or push your abs out into the belt. We don't really love that cue though, as it tends to cause extension and people to only push their abs forward, creating extension through your low back. So what we like to think of is 360 degrees of pressure or circumferential expansion. So if you were to think of your trunk, your core, as a soda can, and that soda can's sitting empty on the table, it takes quite a lot of force to compress it. But as soon as you put a dent in the side of that can, it compresses right away. So Marisa's core is going to be the same way as she sets her air to squat. We don't want to be her abs pushed forward and extension in her low back. We want her hips stacked on top of her ribs, breathing and expanding out in all directions to create as much pressure as possible. So she sets up here, her ribs are down a little bit, kind of almost a very, very slight crunch in her abs, and then breathing out, pushing air down and out into her obliques to create as much pressure through her trunk as possible with 360 degrees of pressure. Our next key technical point we want to address is your foot pressure. So for a long time in the squat, there's a lot of cueing towards sitting back on your heels, and that is not going to be the most stable or effective way for you to squat. So we want to think about having even foot pressure, even between 3 points of contact, your big toe, little toe, and heel. Some people call this the tripod foot. So we want to focus on maintaining 3 even points of contact. We're not rocked back on our heels. We're not forward on our toes with our heels coming off the ground. We want to maintain big toe, little toe, and heel throughout the lift. So as Marisa sets up to squat, we almost want to think about grabbing the ground with those 3 points, kind of using your big toe and little toe and your heel as like talons, grabbing the ground, being as stable as possible. And with that, you've been thinking about screwing your feet into the floor, like a slight external rotation of your feet into the ground to create that pressure. That's going to create a stable hip, keep your knee tracking over your toes just the way we want it. The final technical point that we want to address today is the sequence that you squat. A lot of cueing in the squat towards unlocking at the hips first or pushing your butt back, but we don't really want to squat back with the hips. We want to squat down and up. So we want to have a simultaneous unlocking of the knees and hips. 2 joints at once, kind of like patting your head and rubbing your stomach, but we know you're athletic out there, so it's not going to be too tough. So with this simultaneous unlocking of the knees and hips, Marisa is maintaining that full foot pressure, 3 points of contact, and at the same time, her knees come forward a little bit, her hips go back a little bit. She's squatting straight up and down, keeping the bar over her midfoot throughout the lift. A lot of times if people initiate from the hip first, they tend to get bent over like that. The bar can get forward over the toes, or their weight shifted too far back to the heels, and they lose that even foot pressure that we talked about in the previous point. Now that we talked about the key technical points in the squat, we want to address some common mistakes that we see lifters making. And the first of those common mistakes is going to be overextension through the entire back and the core particularly, and emphasis too much on sitting back in the squat. So as Marisa sets her position, good upper back position, and these mistakes kind of go hand in hand with each other, is for a lot of people, they're cueing so much towards big air into the belly or head and chest up a lot that you can see the extension, overextension it creates through Marisa's entire spine. Lifters who lift like this and set this position, tend to initiate the squat very much from the hip and sit back. And the combination of that overextended position and the sitting back makes it very, very difficult to squat to good depth. So when you're doing that and you sit back too much, you're losing stability in the foot because you don't have your forefoot on the ground very well. You're adding length to the hamstring with the big arched position and then setting back. And a lot of times you're gonna run out of that hamstring length before you get to depth. So you either give up your stability with a big butt wink or you just squat high, and friends don't let friends squat high, so we can't have you doing that. And then with the overextended position through the trunk in the setup, you're not able to create that good can of stability that we were talking about a couple minutes ago. The next common mistake I want to talk about with squat training is something that really hits home for me, because I've dealt with a lot of back pain, back surgeries, all that stuff, and these things are the root cause of a lot of back pain for many, many lifters. And that is having training that becomes overly specific. And of course, specificity is very important, and specificity doesn't just mean that you only do competition squat variations. Specificity is developing the underlying systems of success for the sport, and staying healthy and being able to train hard for a long time is of course part of the systems of success for a powerlifter. So when I talk about being overly specific, the squat is so much about extension, slight extension through the trunk, hip external rotation as you squat, and then kind of avoiding any type of trunk rotation. But there are times when lifting or life presents the need for some sort of flexion, hip internal rotation, and trunk rotation. If you never expose yourself to that in training ever, it's very likely that when you get exposed to it, whether it's under a heavy load and your technique falters a little bit, whether it's that you're giving up a little bit of position rep after rep after rep, or just something else happens in life that you have to not just move up and down with some pieces of metal on your back and twist your trunk or internally rotate your hips or flex your spine, that you have no capacity for it, and pain can be the result of that. So giving yourself some exposure to lumbar flexion, trunk rotation, hip internal rotation through exercises like bird dogs with an internal rotation emphasis, like kneeling band crunches, like rotational staggered stance RDL, whether as part of your warm-up or as accessory exercises, can help you stay healthier so you can train harder, longer, and not be dealing with that back pain that derails so many lifters. So you can learn more about that in a quick video called Exercises That Keep My Back Feeling Good, featuring yours truly, showing you some more examples of that. So now that we understand how to train the squat from a technical standpoint, how should you set up your training? Now, most lifters are going to do the best with the squat training 2 to 3 times a week. Now, are there examples outside of that of people being successful? Of course, but I'm talking generally most lifters squatting 2 to 3 times a week, with one of those being their competition squat variation and the others being some sort of variation either to address a specific weak point or to help manage fatigue. So that if you're squatting 3 times a week, let's say, so with your primary squat, high bar or low bar, whatever that is, on Monday, and then come back on Wednesday, maybe with a variation to address something like a hip imbalance with a unilateral exercise, or maybe you're weak out of the hole, so you're doing a pause squat there, or you're rounding over, so you're using a safety squat bar or front squat. Maybe you have relatively weak legs, so you can get on the belt squat to address that, or a relatively weak back compared to your legs, so you're doing something like a good morning or extra RDL variation on that second day. And then on the third day, addressing another weak point that you might have, or potentially comp squatting again, but at a slightly different loading strategy, maybe a little bit lower intensity on that second day of the week, or using like high bar squat to give your arms a bit of a break from the low bar squat position while still developing your squat through a pretty specific movement pattern. So again, tons of different ways that you can address this. We have a lot more information about it in a very in-depth video called How to Design a Squat Program, or if you're looking for variations to address different weak points, we have a series called Addressing Your Weak Points in the Squat for weak out of the hole, rounding over, weak legs, weak back, anything you can think of, as well as our video Best Exercises to Improve Your Squat. So hopefully you've gained some new insights about how to better train your squat from a technical standpoint, exercise selection standpoint, frequency, all that stuff, and some tips on how to stay healthier through hard training. So if you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe to the channel and check out the Juggernaut AI app at juggernautai.app. You can get a 2-week free trial, over 5,000 reviews with a 4.9 star average. So lifters all over the world are using it to become the strongest versions of themselves. So whether you're young or old, small, big, beginner, intermediate, advanced, strong, weak, Juggernaut AI is going to create the smartest program for you.